The reasons that people leave are that they feel like they're not being valued or seen for what they do. They're not acknowledged enough for their contributions. Those things go a long way in terms of people making the decision to jump ship. Some of that is about taking time and figuring out who a person is at their core. And a lot of that, I think, needs to be done on the front end.
What if your biggest staffing problem isn't wages, and it's not schedules or competition? What if the real issue is that your caregivers no longer feel connected to why they started this work in the first place?
Welcome to From Leads to Leases, a CCR growth podcast that helps senior living providers transform their complex challenges into opportunities. Listen in for stories from industry leaders, innovative strategies, and insights. And with our expertise, learn how to increase occupancy faster, guaranteed.
Welcome back to another episode of From Leads to Leases, the podcast that dives deep into the senior living and senior care industries, bringing you insights, strategies, and stories from the experts at the forefront of innovation, leadership, and care. I'm your host, Jerry Vinci, founder of CCR Growth, the only demand generation agency that is exclusive to the senior living industry. And throughout this podcast, I'm here to guide you through the evolving landscape of senior care, exploring the innovations, strategies, and leadership insights that are shaping the future of the industry. So whether you're a provider, caregiver, or industry leader, this show is here to help you make informed decisions and create meaningful impact. All right, today's guest is Nate Hamme. He's someone who has spent more than a decade studying the human side of long-term care. Nate is the president and executive director of CECA Foundation, a nonprofit built to strengthen the caregiver workforce through recognition, through storytelling, and culture building. His work spans senior living, skilled nursing, home care, hospice, and behavioral health. He has spoken at national and state association conferences, consulted with hundreds of operators, and seen inside communities where caregivers thrive and communities where they don't. So Nate's perspective is grounded in thousands of real stories from frontline staff, from residents and families. These stories reveal what keeps caregivers loyal, what drives them away, and what leaders often overlook when they try to solve retention through wages alone. So Nate, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Jerry. I appreciate the kind introduction, and I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, this is such an important topic, I feel like right now, because, we all know that there's a staffing crisis in this industry, and it's only growing as time goes on and as this silver tsunami starts to take effect. So I think these types of programs are really important, and operators are always looking at new ways for better retention of employees and frontline staff. So I want to definitely get into that, but I think first, just tell us more about what the CECA Foundation is, why it exists, and how it helps operators.
Yeah, sure. So we got our start back in 2013, and like most nonprofit, philanthropic endeavors, inspired by personal experience. The experience of putting a mom or a dad into a long-term care community and kind of turning care over to someone who's a stranger, and I think there's a lot of guilt that goes along with that, even if it's putting somebody in assisted living and or independent living, you're feeling some type of way about it. But the family who founded the organization, the Lawler family, was really moved, inspired by the care their mom, Mary, received over the last 10 years of her life in a Washington, D.C., long-term care community called Knollwood. It was a military retirement community, and Mary spent 10 years there, and the family couldn't have been more thankful that at the end of the day, some of her closest companions at the end of her life were the staff there. She had sort of other residents, certainly, as family, but porters, the housekeepers, the CNAs, they took the time to get to know her and provide this really lovely quality of life that not only did she appreciate, but the family really resonated. And this is not a business where you can tip your waiter, right? It's not, it provides conflict of interest, but something that families can do is provide that positive reinforcement. And we felt like organizations really would benefit from having a foundational, systems, some technology, but also kind of a program that runs the gamut of being comprehensive and focused on meaningful recognition for the work that these people do day in and day out. So we provide these organizations with a full service program that's kind of built soup to nuts, easily implementable, has some technology to make it easy to run and operate, but also some accountability. In these organizations, there are initiatives getting started each and every year, and this is one that you got to hold close to the heart, right? You got to make it a part of your mission and values that you recognize the contributions of your team members. So we've really loved the opportunity that we've gotten to work with, skilled nursing, long-term care organizations around the country, help them increase morale, increase engagement of their team members, and ultimately, drive better retention numbers, significantly higher retention for people who are getting recognized on a regular basis. So the proof is in the pudding. And while this was always, an effort that was very much grounded in the heart, it makes a lot of sense in the head and the pocketbook. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and like you said too, it's difficult sometimes with giving recognition because we can't just give everybody, like slip somebody a tip here and there because of the conflict of interest, and everybody, the staff does become this extended family. We always talk about how a community is not just a place to live; it's a place to call home, and it does become that. So being able to recognize everybody who's making that a possibility is really a great thing. So I love what you're doing. I've been in marketing for almost 3 decades, and through my agency, I've helped some of the largest senior living providers attract qualified leads and fill rooms faster while lowering their acquisition costs. But one thing kept bothering me. While working with larger communities, I kept meeting smaller operators, 10 to 50 bed communities that were struggling to compete with the big box providers because they don't have the same budget, staffing, or support behind them. And as a small business owner myself, I get that. You're wearing 5 different hats, you're trying to fill rooms while still giving great care, and that's exactly why we built Growthly. Growthly takes everything we've learned from helping large operators fill their buildings and makes it accessible to smaller communities without retainers, without long-term contracts or inflated costs. It's a performance-based partnership, and you only pay when we deliver move-ins. We help you stand out online, stop depending on referral agencies, bring in qualified families, and fill your community faster. Growthly is built for your small community and designed for big results. Learn more at growthlyseniorliving.com.
Thank you.
I want to talk specifically about the caregiver equation because, as people will say, the math isn't mathing here. By 2040, the population aged 85 and older is supposed to double in the U.S. So I think it's growing by like 111%. But the ratio of working age adults to older adults is projected to decline sharply. That is alarming alone. But when you look ahead, say like 15 years in this industry, what worries you most about the workforce our field will be relying on?
Yeah, I think a friend of mine wrote a really interesting article. Basically, said, "Are we obsessed with the staffing shortage?" And in some ways, using it as a
Good question.
crutch. A crutch to say, "Well, we got to do more. We got to get more out of our people, and we're not going to be able to solve this. We just got to deal." As you said, as recently as 5 years ago, there were 9 Americans under the age of 45 for every American over the age of 85. And in 15 years, that'll be 4. So if folks are worried now that they've got a staffing shortage, wait until they have less than half of the people to fill those roles. And, clearly there's other things going on here, on the skilled side, Medicaid reimbursement rates, they haven't kept up in a lot of ways, and they're talking about cutting them. But you got a generation of people who are going to need the services you provide. And the bottom line is you got to become more appealing employers to the prospective people out there if you hope to keep pace. The demand is going to be there. The money hopefully will follow. But how are you going to have people to provide the hands that care in your buildings? So I think, a lot of what we've been focused on is trying to show people that, yeah, there are other jobs out there, and, fast food isn't going away either, but you're going to get a lot more out of helping an elderly person live a really high quality of life in their remaining years than you are for, flipping burgers and serving other things. And I don't mean that disparagingly. There's a place for everybody, and some people are more cut out for the work than others. All of us want to feel like what we chose to do was the right choice. And a lot of that is communicating the value that people provide, acknowledging them when they do something the right way, building up their sense of self-esteem, and turning that job and paycheck into a career and ideally a calling where they feel like, I'm really good at this. I love the smiles that I get to put on people's faces, whether I'm cleaning the floors, whether I'm serving the food, or whether I'm doing the clinical side of things. Um, all these folks want to know that they're on the right path. And I'm sure you and I feel the same way about over our careers when that's worked out really well and we felt rejuvenated each day we get to come in and do something. It's usually because we had some moment of feeling like what we did mattered, or that we had some success and we saw it on somebody's face. So that's really been a focus of ours, and recognition is just a wonderful tool. It's one in the tool belt for employee engagement and retention, but it's one you should be bringing out frequently. It's measuring tape. Bring it out twice before you bring out the saw.
Yeah.
So that's kind
Love
of
that.
our philosophy, and we've seen it work. We've seen it work in organizations across the care continuum and around the country. So it's a very effective thing, and one that we really love people implementing, because it's the fun part too, right? It's talking about the work you do and why it matters.
Yeah, I mean I'll be honest and say that I had a hard time identifying that before I got involved in this industry. I kind of felt like our work was meaningless in some sense. Yes, we were helping our clients improve their businesses, right? When we were like a full service agency, but we were a generalist. But now that we're in this space, to see that what we're doing is helping operators, create a better experience for older adults, and to be able to do it for more, but to be able to fill their buildings and help more people, I think is really rewarding for us. So I love that. Um, you know, I mean, we're always asking people to do more with less. And I think like that's kind of the danger that this industry faces right now, is we're asking people to do more with less. And operators also are trying to keep costs down. But realistically, like if that population is surging, the only way to solve that is with more people getting involved, more, more hires. We can only do so much with what we have, right? So how do we how do we attract more people to this industry, but then also keep costs down? Because that's the other factor too. It's like, okay, we can hire 10 more, frontline staff, but that means that the residents are going to have to pay another X amount, per month for us to make that happen. So how do we do that and not drive up the cost, which is already crazy expensive for a lot of older adults?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into, the calculus here of what it costs to run a business. I think, clearly technology is one that, we utilize for our programs. It's one of the backbone elements of our platform program in doing these recognition initiatives. But I do see a lot of people kind of wringing their hands about having a lot of different systems. It's a new system every year, or, we're moving,
Yeah, true.
migrating, or we're adding something in. And, obviously there's a lot of excitement, I think, for good reasons, about artificial intelligence and what that may be able to do to streamline workflows. And I really hope, in particular for people like CNAs, people who do charting and things like that, that it it can be done in an easier way, right? Where it saves them time, and then they get to focus on the hands-on stuff, the stuff they probably like more, because you don't meet a whole lot of people who say doing paperwork is their favorite part of the job. But
No.
if we're honest, I think study after studies come out on AI's impact, is the disruptive nature on certain jobs and careers. And in every case, the ones that are most likely to be disrupted are managerial folks. So if you're thinking AI is going to come in and save your butt with, frontline workers, AI is going to stand for ain't it. That's not the answer for you. In fact, it's going to probably change your day to day more than it's going to change the need for people who are, out there putting their hands on the people that you care for and that you serve. I think there's a lot that goes into it. Certainly a lot of people who are thinking hard about the model, the business model, but also like, what do senior housing communities look like? What do senior living communities look like? Um, and that's above my pay grade a little bit, if I'm honest, Jerry. But I do think that efficiency is an important one, but there's also just a real need to acknowledge that costs are investments. If you flip the coin over. And investments in people, I think, rarely go sideways. Investments in certain other things may end up saying, well, this was a nothing burger. We didn't get what we hoped out of it. Um, and it just is kind of disruptive. But I think it's why people who are relational leaders rather than solely actuarial or tactical leaders really thrive in this industry because their people love them. And if you could save your HR department, um, 10 hours a month by ensuring that they don't have to be hiring and hiring and hiring and hiring because the people don't want to leave, I think that's the type of efficiency that's going to make a real difference. And it makes everybody happier to come into work when they know they're not going to have to deal with those kind of laundry type tasks. The laundry ends
Yeah.
and laundry starts. You take off your shirt and you have to put it in. So, um, from my standpoint, that's where I would say, you know, look at your people, find ways to get more out of them because they are engaged and enjoying what they do and seeing their impact on the business overall.
Yeah, I think that's great insight because I think that the majority of what sets a community apart, I don't want to say a good community from a bad community, but a better performing community would be the experience that those residents and even prospective residents are seeing when they tour, and that's not something that AI is going to bring to the table. That's about the human. So the more the where AI helps in that situation is essentially giving those caregivers more time back to do more in-person things to show up, in the lives of their residents the way that it was intended. So I s- I don't know. Yeah, I agree with everything you said.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been in a lot of buildings over the years and a slightly lower number of communities. Some places you come in and you see people who look or feel defeated, and that's not what you want. You want people coming into a smiling face, a hand ready to help and answer questions. So, um, that's where you can be a differentiator. And the service industry, people who have run successful boutique luxury hotel brands get a lot of uh, attention here, just in terms of, well, how can we provide better experiences? And as a leader, I think you got to be looking at your employee experience even before you look at your resident client experience.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to retention too, what um, what do you think leaders are misreading about why their staff might walk out?
Well, I think, one thing's for sure, people do need to be paid for the work that they do. Um, but I always make a point of saying that you don't need to have the highest wages. You need to have fair and competitive ones. Certainly you don't want to find out that you're making half as much as somebody down the road. That's going to be demoralizing because it's
Yeah,
about feeling valued, that you don't
yeah,
value me
yeah,
as much as the person doing the same job. But people don't typically leave for 25 cents, 50 cents, even a dollar more an hour unless they were already looking, to even consider it. It's a pain to switch jobs. So I think a lot of leaders have kind of, and I don't want to be disparaging here either. This is a really hard position to be in, is leading organizations like these. So, but typically it's not that one extra dollar an hour. It's because their schedule is not fitting their life. It's not flexible enough. It's not considerate enough of their child care or family care duties. Um, the lack of flexibility is a big one. Um, and certainly career development is another big one, especially for folks coming in fresh out of college or
yeah.
fresh out of high
True.
school. They want to understand, they, you know, if just personally, when I graduated from high school, if you had told me any of the jobs that I would hold over the course of my career, I would have said, I didn't know any of those were jobs. I didn't know they existed, frankly. So they don't know what's out there. And you got to say, you come in and you're going to learn how to care for people. You're going to learn how to do X, Y, or Z. And then here are the things you can do with that information to build and grow. So career development is a big one. But ultimately, I think, again, I'm a big into relational leadership, and the reasons that people leave are that they feel like they're not being valued or seen for what they do. they're not acknowledged enough for their contributions. And sure, some of that comes into, into clear view with feeling valued through a paycheck. But imagine if you've been working at a place for years and you've built great relationships with the residents and you've built great relationships with your coworkers, and you have a manager who you feel like actually knows, more than just your first name. They know who your spouse is or your kids' names are, or, what neighborhood you live in or what you like to do on the weekends. Those things go a long way in terms of people making the decision to jump ship. So, some of that is about taking time and figuring out who a person is at their core. And a lot of that, I think, needs to be done on the front end, right? You hire people because they have the qualifications, they fit the schedule, they fit a need that you have. And, but where does it go from there? And if you're just throwing them out onto the floor, you're probably going to have a bad time. You're probably going to have this issue of like, I don't feel like I have support. I don't feel like I have anybody who's helping me out. And that's why the first 30, 60, 90, 100 days is so important when you're bringing on new people, because they have to feel like you see them, you're acknowledging them, you're building up their sense of self-esteem, and you're finding ways to make sure that they're happy in what they're doing.
Yeah, there was a statistic that said, I think it was like nearly 40% of new caregivers leave within the first 90 days. And it's often due to overwhelming onboarding or like weak supervisory support. So that's definitely in alignment with what you're talking about. I mean, out of those caregivers who leave early in the process, I mean, have you noticed that there's a pattern of why that happens? Outside of what you already mentioned, I mean, do you see it like consistently? Is it on? I mean, for me, it would definitely be onboarding. That's a big one. Just throwing somebody into the fire and expecting them, to hit the ground running is a tall order, especially in this industry.
Yeah, that I think is the biggest one because, unfortunately, you're casting a line here to try to get somebody to take a job that you have available, and the hooking them is really only the first step. Somebody says, "Yeah, I'll take it." That's really like not even step one. That's your opportunity to pitch why this is the right fit for them. Because, we've seen what the job market's like. It's a pretty tight labor market. There are positions in a number of different fields that people can get without a lot of experience, and they probably pay pretty closely. Um, and this one can be hard. It can be challenging because it is so, where you get so invested in people. So onboarding is a huge one. Again, if the only questions you're asking during that sort of initial period are about, you know, the address, social security number, and the routing number where I can drop your paycheck, then it's a real missed opportunity. This is a good way for you to ask questions that make people feel like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Gives me a chance to think about something. How would I like to be acknowledged? What if I was going to be given a gift? What type of gift would I want to get? What do you value most about this? Try to get at the why of somebody even considered the job to begin with. And surely you can do some of that during the interview process, but really get at the heart of what's going to keep them around. So I think some of the complaints that I've heard over the years are, hey, they bring us into a room and they do 8 hours straight with like a couple of bathroom breaks, and they bought us lunch. But I've heard a number of times people who say, I actually brought my own lunch. It's in the car, and then they hear the tires squealing in the parking lot. It's like, so don't stick them in a room for 8 straight hours. Don't press play on a video because that's the most efficient thing to do. Bring in a variety of different people from around the community, obviously your DSD or whatever, staff development person, HR person, to explain benefits and things like that. Those people you're going to want there. Bring in the top person, executive director, administrator, get some face time with new people. Try to figure out ways to get them to know each other's names. If you're doing trainings with multiple people in the same room, play a couple games so that they can get to know each other. What's better than a smiling face on day 2 coming in because you've bonded a little bit with something? Turn the second half of the day into an activity. Again, we're gonna walk around. We're gonna do a scavenger hunt here. We talked about where, the fire extinguishers are and X, Y, and Z. Um, Make sure that they're not sitting, because I can't do it. I'm in my 40s here. I can't sit in a room for 8 hours. Like I got to get up, I got to walk around, and those are the things that I think people start to feel like this is not for me. And like you said, just if you're throwing them out there with nobody to hold their hand a little bit, show them around, coach them through some things. A lot of people have frequent check-ins in that early period. I believe in it. What I recommend is every day the first week, every week the first month, every month the first quarter, and then every quarter from there on out at the very least. So have a routine, and building the routine makes this a lot easier. It may sound like heavy-handed, but it goes a long way, and it'll save you time on the back end.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I always ask myself too, like the whole entire healthcare industry is challenged when it comes to caregivers and just frontline staff. So I mean, what what is going to compel someone to choose this versus something less stressful, right? Like working in a memory care community is stressful. It is high stress. It is one of the highest stress environments that somebody could possibly choose to work in. So what incentive is there going to be for somebody choosing that? I know this is a calling, right? So like a lot of people in this industry, they're in it because they've experienced this. They've gone through it with a family member. They know how hard it is and they want to be there to help others, which is great. But like I think that intentional retention piece, like you're talking about, like what are they going to do that's going to add value, so much value that even if the pay is just comparable or even less, that they would choose to stay because it's a better experience, a better culture, better environment than somewhere else,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think this is a really gets at the core of it, Jerry. I you mentioned memory care, and this is one of the things where we've had volunteers who've served on some of our selection panels, and they get to visit the buildings and help present some of our awards. And if you've never been in a memory care unit, there are going to be some things that might shock you or astound you just out of lack of familiarity. Sights, sounds, and smells, things that if you took a job with an organization, you'd only seen really the outside of the building and the HR office, you're you're in for, a shock. You got to make sure that when you're selling a job, when you're selling somebody on your organization, that you're not misleading them. That just say, "Oh gosh, we've got the best team here, and you're gonna love our residents, and like everybody's easy and no problem." Um, there are difficult people out there, and that's not their
Yeah.
fault in a lot of cases. But you're gonna run across them, and they're team members, and that sometimes they're clients. So, um, I think a lot of the time you want to have some of that mentorship, preceptorship type of relationship going on that allows you to walk into a room that may have some things that immediately sort of alarm bells are going off and see how they handle it. Just come around with me. I want to introduce you to one of our residents here. And it could be somebody who's, doesn't have a lot of energy and kind of just sits around, and see how they engage them,
See, yeah.
and see how
Yeah.
they deal with outbursts, and all those sorts of things give you the opportunity to see how it's done. And then the end result, which is a hug, or, forehead to forehead, and people who just, you can't help but have your heart melt at these things. So you want them to see the stuff that's going to be a challenge, but then the resolution to it and what that feels like. Um, you know, we always recommend that for onboarding, you also give an opportunity to bring in the sweetest resident that you can find, because this is you get to care for people like Mr. Hill or Mrs. Smith. And they come in and they say a few words about themselves. I mean, humanizing each other is really key. And I think that's why the more you can learn about a person, whether you're the person caring for them or you're working with them and managing them, the more likely you are to find some connection, something that you share in common. And that will propel you to new heights in your own relationship with that person, and make it easier to come in on after you've had a really hard day, because you get to see that person, you get to have that opportunity to connect. So, I know this kind of all seems like best case scenario here, but it's not. It's about finding ways to kind of turn that challenging situation into an opportunity for folks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the support piece too, knowing you're supported, knowing you have somebody you can lean on is really important. And knowing that right out of the gate too, not having to find that out 2 months into the job.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
we talked a lot about like why people leave, but I want to flip that around. So in your experience too, I mean, what is the simplest indicator that a caregiver feels connected enough to stay?
Well, I'll make a bad, they say that the most contagious thing in a nursing home is a smile. And I kind of believe that a little bit, again, people, you can kind of tell people who want to be there or get some joy out of what they get to do. And yeah, it's not to say that you got to manufacture a smile or coax people into being happy. But I think you can get an idea of where people are at, even on a day-to-day basis with just their demeanor. And so that requires paying attention some sense to that element of it. Um, I think it also just really behooves you to be asking questions on a regular basis. And, a lot of organizations have implemented things like pulse surveys, almost like in an airport, you pass through security and there's, a smiling face, a flat face and a frowning face, and it's like, how did we do today? And it's like the simplest possible way of providing some level of feedback. Um, I think pulse surveys are really good for what they are, which is more opportunities to ask questions that kind of might give you reveal some insights. And the funny thing about asking people questions is that, again, it's a good first step, but it's not the last step, because when they tell you something, then you got to be ready to act on it. So, there's this concept of the idea-driven organization. So when you're asked, you want to ask questions certainly about like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? You feeling supported? You like what you get to do? Our organization has basically a 10-question engagement survey that tries to get at exactly that. Are these people engaged in the work that they're doing? You also want to ask, what are the pebbles in your shoe on a daily basis? What is making your day more challenging than it needs to be? Or as a manager, how can I better support you? What physical resources might I be able to give you, or what other emotional resources might I be able to give you? And then when you get that information, you got to do something with it. But even if you're not going to act on everybody's idea about how it's going to transform their day, you got to be able to say, I really love that you thought through this and gave it to us, and we're actively trying to figure out how to remove this burden, remove this hurdle for you. A lot of times people have to look at their hiring process and figure out what the barriers to people saying yes are. You send in an application and nobody gets back to you for 48 hours. That's a barrier to your success in bringing them in. You want to get back to them as quickly as possible. How do you communicate with them? If you're insistent on email, they're text message people, that's a barrier. They don't like using email. The same thing should be said about retention, is that you got to put up barriers for people to want to leave. And a lot of those barriers at the end of the day are, they like who they're working with. They feel like they get to see impact on a daily basis. They feel like you are doing everything in your power to make their lives easier rather than pile on and ask more of them. Um, you you may have had to do this. I know I left at least one job over the years where I really liked the people that I worked with. Um, it is hard. It's hard to make that decision when you like the people and when you see that you're doing good work. And sometimes better opportunities come along. And I think the last thing we want is to scare people away from working in this industry altogether. There's a competition, but I hope it's a friendly one between senior living communities, nursing homes, you know, memory care places. If somebody stays in the family, stays in the industry, I would consider that a win. They just found an opportunity that better suited their needs at that time. This is all just, my thinking of how you can kind of suss out whether people are feeling like they're going to stick around. Is, do they have some strong relationships? Have you done a good job of building those things? And have you been listening to them? Goes a long way in them feeling supported and valued.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I would agree with that. And then you mentioned managers in there, and that was kind of my next thought was, I don't know if I have a question here. Maybe you can just weigh in on this, but just talking about the leadership gap, I know I've noticed in the last 2 decades of being in this industry that there's been a shift from where there's more leaders at the top who are financially focused, right? It's financially oriented leadership. We're more worried about the numbers, it seems at times, than worried about the people and the residents. And I think that's, changed the morale within the community. There was even a data point that said that community saw like a 30% higher retention rate when they had high performing cultures and leaders who spent more time on coaching and and interpersonal support. So I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What needs to change at the top? How are these leaders that are financially focused missing the mark?
Yeah, this is a very relevant one, Jerry. I think at least one of the industries that we work in, I would say, is kind of there's a slippery slope happening here. And first acknowledge why I think it's happening. There's a litigious element to care and caregiving that for operators and the financial people, they're very worried about exposure, that somehow somebody's going to come in and try to sue them and take every asset that they've got. And they may have made a mistake in one building, but they've got 10 others. And you don't want to be able to ruin their opportunity to continue doing good work because something bad happened in one place. I understand that. But the industry is becoming more siloed in a way that has me very concerned. You cannot find out who owns the organizations. You can't get in touch with people who are, basically anybody on the corporate side, anybody who is even mid-management outside of the buildings. There's not an opportunity to see a face and to talk with people. And what I've seen and personally experienced is that when a building gets sold, there's a lot of fear that goes on within the ranks of the employees, and they're kind of told to just stop doing things, focus on just the core stuff, and we'll get back to you in 6 months when we've done a review of some of the operational and financial things. Um, I think that in some ways makes it easier when you try to tell people you got to do more with less, because you haven't they don't know you, that they probably don't see your face regularly. On the flip side, some of the there's a book called Long-Term Care Success that a friend of mine, Mark Parkinson, and David Gifford wrote this last year, that was looking at skilled nursing facilities. But they basically did a dive into some of the companies, small, medium, large, that had been around for decades and continued to be leaders in operational, clinical, and financial measures, and kind of revealed some of the secrets that they had and things that they'd done to perpetuate that success year after year, decade after decade. Um, and some of them have very, interesting ways of doing it, but pretty much across the board, culture is a central one. They have clearly stated mission, vision, and values statements that kind of encapsulate what makes them different or how they want to do things. I find that to be, you know, fleshed out in the experience that I've had with organizations that I've run across. And again, if you've got a strong culture, you know who you are, you know who you want to be, that goes a long way. But they've also done really creative things with compensation for people at the leadership level, managerial level. So, for example, there are some organizations that will pay a very modest salary to the top person in each of their buildings. Very modest in compared to the rest of the industry. But their bonuses are very substantial, and they're based on a handful of different metrics that are easily measurable, but also clearly defined. And some of the major ones are around employee retention and satisfaction. So what that does is creates an environment where, it's not the administrator's responsibility to figure out the clinical plans for each of the residents. They have a DON, they have a clinical person for that. it is the administrator's job to get to know the people around them, to walk the halls, to shake hands, to learn things about people, to remember birthdays, to find every opportunity to make them feel valued and wanted and seen. And because at the end of the day, love it or leave it here, their compensation is based on the idea that they need to have happy people working in the buildings because they're the ones that do all the hands-on work, and I think that's a very interesting one. Again, this is I think as in some senses, our society has made decisions on how we want things, and some of those have led to the situation we're in where we know there's a need for care outside of the home and who's going to be there to provide it. But on the same token, if you can figure out creative ways to get people focused on the right things, then you see success year after year. And so I just think that there is no shortage of creativity. You were talking about in the introduction, people are looking for creative operational solutions, things that are going to make them more efficient, things that are going to remove some of their headaches and pain points that maybe not everybody is doing to the extent that they should be doing it. And I think what I've seen over the years in doing this with recognition programs, with encouraging people to celebrate their team members, is that I think prior to the pandemic, a lot of people said, well, yeah, it sounds nice. And yeah, I say thank you to my employees all the time. And so, yeah, but it's just not a priority for us right now. And then the pandemic happened and it's like, we know what our people are going through. Maybe we do have to be creative about supporting them in different ways. And a lot of folks came out of it with something maybe that they didn't have before that was intended to kind of tell the story of what each of their team members do. And I think that helps the industry as a whole, right? If we can share positive experiences, get people loving what they do, and
Mhm.
and scream it from the mountaintops, more people will consider working in this field, which I have come to love over the decades. I see it every day and I hear about it every day. These wonderful people making a difference in people's lives. And, again, I'm in my 40s and I'm not sure I've ever cried as much as I do now in my life because I get to hear things that just move me to tears, things that hospice workers are doing, things that, they share some of the tenderest moments of people's lives with them. So that's the type of stuff that I think would motivate folks to get involved. And again, from an operational perspective, getting back to your question here, the actuarial element of it. And I don't want to just, bash broadly here, but if your goal is to slash expenses so that your top line, you know, profits look better, you can do that for a year and maybe 2 years. But
Yeah.
year 3 is going to be painful, and we saw it during the pandemic too. A lot of people, you're having to go in with full PPE into, segmented areas of facilities. It was scary, man. People said, I got to be here for my residents. I got to be here.
Yeah.
And they came in every day.
Oh, it was amazing.
And
Yep.
they rented RVs so they didn't have to stay in their own house because they were worried about getting their family sick. And they camped out in the parking lots. Like you just hear these things that like, wow. And you can do that for a year, maybe 2 years. At some point there's a breaking, and a lot of people decided I did what I could to help keep things going, and I just can't anymore. It's time for me to ride off into the sunset. And if your goal is to pump up the value of some asset, yeah, you can cut expenses down to the bone and they'll limp along for a while. But my concern is really for the care, the quality of care, and the broader industry here is we aren't, a strip and burn type of sector. We are a loving, caring type of sector. And how do we want to be defined? I don't think that people are going to want to work in this industry if they see that the top line revenue is really where people's hearts and minds are at. And that being said, organizations need to be around to be able to provide the services. So
Yeah.
what you're doing,
it's a business, but yeah.
what you're doing is really important, And again, it's just at the, every successful organization has talented people behind it. And that's from top to bottom, and you need them. So, generally I just, that's my biggest fear, honestly, Jerry, for organizations that I've seen is just kind of have a short-term mindset with this stuff, because you make investments, you don't slash expenses, and it's not every expense is a cost, it's an investment in something.
I love that. No, I think it's a great perspective, and thank you for sharing all that because I think that culture builds slowly and erodes quickly. Um, and I think the operators and leaders who are only focused on that bottom line number, yeah, they might see improvements over short term, but what's that doing to their culture? Oddball question, but I mean, obviously, we know that there's a huge emotional nature to the work that's being done by caregivers. And how does the emotional nature of the work they're doing influence retention in ways that an operator might not be thinking about? Are there things that they're not considering that they should be?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and um, I tend to think that, again, there's some, depending on the care setting, there's some element of some people are not cut out for the work. Um, we talked about setting expectations, and you get somebody in who's got no idea the level of emotional resonance, or being in touch with that stuff that's kind of required from doing it. Um, I do think operators have gotten a lot better about trying to provide emotional and spiritual support to their people. They come up with creative programs or ways or benefits. If you ever need to talk to somebody, we'll cover, some sessions for you, or having somebody trained on staff who can, step in and help with certain things. Um, I think the best organizations are ones where when you lose a resident, you lose somebody that you've been caring for, that everybody is devastated, you know? And that's just the unfortunate nature of the thing, is that, you build these relationships and you take so much time and care, and you're going to lose people. Um, I think that's the sign of a good organization and a good community. So, but I don't think it can be well, this happens. We got to be strong for everybody else. Let's get back to it. There has to be some opportunity for people to come in and have conversations about how they're dealing with those, really difficult circumstances. Um, so I don't know that I have a great one for you in terms of an insight about what organizations should be doing differently. I will say that emotion is a big part of working in this sector, and you want people who aren't robots. You obviously you need them to be able to keep it together, but um, you don't want robots out there. So you're going to bring people in, and the ones who are most likely to succeed have that element or that capacity. Um, but you have to acknowledge that when the stuff happens that affects people really deeply, that you're also there as a shoulder to cry on and maybe somebody to cry with. So um, the emotion is your strength, not your weakness. And so I think it's the way to tell the story about what this industry has to offer, is touching human moments that inspire people, that give us a glimpse into the best this life has to offer. Um, and that's where I think we need to be from an industry perspective. Again, if we want to be that employer of choice in our communities, this is what your opportunity is here. You're not going to feel like this, at the Amazon warehouse picking up boxes. Um, that's where I'd love to see organizations kind of, lean into the stuff that, again, can be a challenge.
More of that, please.
Yeah.
That's I think that's what this industry has such a hard time articulating because it is so complex. If more people could understand and feel that tangible emotional connection to this work, I think more people would want to do this work. And I think more families would be inclined to want to have their loved one in a community. If the placement rate is less than 10% out of all eligible, seniors right now, there's clearly a missed mark in terms of the messaging that's coming out or the perception of what senior living is versus what the reality of what it could be. if people were more docked into it like you're talking about. I want to talk about uh, gratitude and recognition, two things that I know are kind of cornerstone of what it is that you do. Last time we spoke, you said that a single story of gratitude can sustain a caregiver through a difficult season. Why does that matter so much in these types of settings, in the high acuity settings?
Yeah. First I'll reference some research here. So Harvard Business Review did a study and they asked people about kind of how they like to be shown their appreciation. And it turns out that, and I think unsurprisingly, fields like education and social work and care workers place a much higher value on symbolic recognition and things that show them that they're making a difference in people's lives. Just, being acknowledged, the words of affirmation. Um, you know, Both the general population and people who work in this industry, words of affirmation is their number one love language by a fairly large margin. Most people say they just want people to know that they appreciate what they're doing. you know, Quality time, acts of service, those things are really important as well. The one that doesn't show up there a lot is receiving gifts. That's the lowest across the board, pretty much.
Interesting.
And somehow we've kind of gotten it in our heads that, we need to be buying pizza for people and focus solely on wages. And so it's the stomach and the pocketbook rather than the hearts and the minds. And that's where I think we've made a mistake. So, I think, again, I encourage everybody listening and, us talking here to think about a time where somebody saw something special that we were doing or that we had accomplished and let us know it, and how often we reach back into the well for that feeling and that understanding that what we're doing matters. Um, you know, if you probably received a handwritten card from somebody that expressed gratitude, and 75% of people who get that type of stuff keep it somewhere. They don't throw it away.
Yeah,
They put it in a drawer, they put it in a
true.
folder. And sometimes it's just, you pull the drawer open, you look in just to say, okay, that's, I needed that. Um, Another professor that I had during college called them toothbrush moments, things that you're kind of looking at yourself in the mirror and it's like, what are you thinking about as you got to go in for the day? And if you can tap into that one thing that went well, you're able to forget a lot of the things that maybe you wish it could have gone better. So I think with our programs, thank you goes a long way, a pat on the back, but what really goes a long way is having the opportunity to do something formal and structured that persists. And so when
Yeah, a
folks,
system of some kind. Yeah,
exactly, something comprehensive, something, and that when it goes in somewhere, it doesn't disappear into a drawer, that it kind of, there's a place where good stuff is always going on. And when you get acknowledged in that way and find out about it in a timely fashion and are then acknowledged publicly, and then, have people talk about why this is so important and why it advances the mission of your organization, why it really, puts on display the values that we hold dear. That's why the research suggests this has such a big impact on people's feeling of of satisfaction, of engagement, and of, at the end of the day, retaining people. Now, the studies prove it out. The research shows this is one of the most effective ways of doing this, and certainly the most cost-effective way, because all it involves is something you should be doing pretty much anyway if you're a good manager. But if you don't have the system, you don't have the tools, it's not easy. And I think the forgotten task is one that people generally like doing when they have the opportunity, but they get so busy. So we help these organizations build this culture of gratitude through a very easy to sort of run initiative, that we put a priority on this and say, our people are our most valuable asset, and we will acknowledge the good stuff when we hear about it, but we need your help hearing about it. So one of the things that we've been really successful at, especially in assisted living, senior living communities, is getting residents and their families involved in the process of recognizing the staff, an easy pathway for them to share a good experience that they had, because a lot of times that's what you want to hear, right? Is that the person that
Hmm.
you're helping actually felt like they were taken care of, that they had been valuable, valued in that exchange. Um, so, I just think, I think anecdotally, I see it personally, when things go well, the hard day is a little bit easier to get over and, have that comeback sauce. Um, but the research supports it. Again, if you can do this in a routine fashion, I think Gallup says that you should try to recognize people once every 7 days, which might seem like a lot, but it actually fits really well into business routine. If that Monday meeting comes around and the first item on the agenda is, does anybody have something that went really well last week? There's somebody who helped them do something, solve a problem, deal with a challenge. We'd love to hear it. Please tell us. Otherwise, we're behind our closed doors here too often. We want to hear about the stuff that's happening. Maybe just two people in the room. Um, People will take you up on it, and people will feel inspired whether they were mentioned by name or not. So it's just, we all kind of, I think, have that desire to know that somebody saw us doing the right thing the right way. Um, and they say it a lot of times, what you do behind closed doors when you think nobody's watching really matters. But when people are watching and they're ready to say thank you, it really can transform culture, and it gets at the heart of what you're doing, which is serving your clients, serving the residents, serving their families in a way that really transforms lives.
Laughing on the inside while we're talking about recognition because last night my son, he's 13, that was his biggest issue with my wife and I. He said that he didn't feel like he was being recognized for the work he did in the house, for the chores that he was doing. He's like, I would just like to hear more appreciation for the things that I'm doing. So I'm like, yeah, it makes total sense that that's a human core emotion that we deal with, is that we want to be seen and commended for the work that we're doing. And I think, in this industry, of course, like we want to make sure every chance we get that we're singing the praises of the people who are making it a reality.
Yeah.
So I thought that was funny.
Yeah. Yep.
What about families and residents? How are they influencing the culture? Like in terms of recognition and appreciation. I mean, how are you folding that into this program?
Yeah. We make a big point of saying that, the dirty little secret here is that while we're here to help recognize the contributions of the staff, at the end of the day, this program is about you, the residents, the families, and the quality of care that you receive and the experience that you have here. From a leadership framework, I always think, again, a leader's job is to make their staff happy, and the staff's job is to make the clients happy. And the financial success will come from having clients who are stick around, and you spread the good word about the quality that you provide. Um, it is really critical, and our best performing programs typically have really high participation from residents and their families. So we try to find creative ways to make sure that they are aware that this is not only an opportunity they have to talk about what people are doing and make sure that people they feel like are doing a really good job are acknowledged, but also to inform us about the types of behaviors that they would really like to see more of. So you get that story about, somebody who, one of the ones that I shared with my partner here was about a, a woman who came in and had this terrible decision of having to, put her husband in a memory care unit. And
Mhm.
one of the housekeepers came over and grabbed her by the hand and say, I'm here every day, and I will take great care of your husband, and let me show you around. Let me walk you around a little bit. Again, this person is charged with having a clean and safe environment. And she took that opportunity to touch somebody's hand and reassure them during a really difficult period. And when she shared that, this lady ended up receiving the award that quarter because it really demonstrated that in the job description, outside of the job description, our goal here as individuals is to make sure that the residents and families feel like they're being served in the way they want to be served. So, um, they are critical, man. At the end of the day, that's who we are ultimately there for. And obviously, we got to get buy-in from leadership teams who believe in this culture stuff and believe that recognition drives better engagement, satisfaction, quality, and the financial outcomes that, come out of that. But at the end of the day, the people doing the work and the people who are being cared for are really the drivers of this program, because we want them kind of sharing why they, are inspired or motivated or happy. Um, so like I said, the little bit of the dirty little secret is that while we do have to convince organizations this is worth investing something in, time primarily, and a little bit of resources, this is really a great way of improving experience for everybody involved, the
Yeah.
residents, the families, and the staff members.
Because, well, my last question to you, I think, because we're facing this staffing challenge now and into the future. If you had a room of executive directors and could give them one directive to prepare for the next decade, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I can't claim to know everything that they go through. I've been doing this long enough to know a lot of the ins and outs of the industry and kind of how the businesses function. Um, but I think when you work in a sector that is so dearly human, so much about human interactions and about caring for people that, um, frankly, is in the job description of so many of the staff, it it really is in your best interest to be as human as you can with them at the end of the day. And I think this is what we've been trying to do with our programs, with the education that we provide, the platform that we've built, is to provide easier pathways and opportunities for people to connect and to kind of feel connected to one another. Investing in your people is rarely a bad investment. Again, there's some things that you probably could spend more on than others. And I talk about it in a lot of my presentations. It's like Nate is not up here telling us, "Hey, we don't have to pay. We don't have to pay people." Nope. Nate is saying, "Oh, that we are the wellness programs that we've been doing. Nope, we can throw those aside." Now, I think all the things that you can think through and implement and make efficient, and those things go a long way. But at the core of it, people are either going to want a paycheck or they're going to want to do what they're being paid to do. And we've seen enough of this. People can come in and take your job and get a paycheck until they find something that suits them better. Um, and there are all sorts of reasons why a job might not be a good fit for somebody. But if the fault in our stars is that we have not been as kind of straightforward and on the nose about why working in this industry is a worthwhile thing, then it's a failure all around. So, and I think a lot of these executive directors know this. I'm always heartened when I hear about somebody who's risen to an ED or an admin who
Hmm.
used to work on the front lines. I started out as an activity assistant, or I
Yeah,
started out as a
hear
CNA,
that a lot. Yeah.
and I'm sitting here saying, I bet you believe in this stuff and you just wish it was a little bit easier to run a comprehensive program. We'd be a great partner for you. We're a nonprofit. We're not going to charge you an arm and a leg. We're all about impact. We share the same mission and values that you do. Yeah, if you could hire more people who have seen all the different sides of the business, including that part in front, front of the house, I think they would be better off. But there are a lot of smart people working in this industry. I come across them every day. I know they're under a lot of pressure, and I guess from my standpoint, the only thing I caution is that yes, you gotta make money, you gotta have a sustainable business, but it's got to be a sustainable business that does what you're there to do, which is provide these really positive experiences for people who just need a little bit more care than they did yesterday. So I know there are a lot of them out there, and I'm shouting out to the dozens of people who we've had the opportunity to work with and just have been really wonderful over the years, to us and just to work with. But, that's, I guess that's it for me.
No, that's great advice. Nate, thank you so much for such a great conversation today. Where can our audience go to learn more about CECA Foundation or connect with you directly?
Yeah, thank you. And Jerry, you're a great dude. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.
Um, our website is cecafoundation.org, CECA foundation.org. We're on some of the social media channels as well, but I think if you visit our website, we've got some videos about our program and the impact. Obviously we're a nonprofit and we always appreciate donations and things, but if you'd like to become involved, there's other ways to do so. And if you work in a senior living community, if you work in a nursing home or skilled nursing, and you're saying, yeah, we would love to do something that helps build morale, helps build self-esteem, helps build employee engagement, and of course, lower turnover and increase retention. This is a really fun way to do it without having to spend an arm and a leg. And ultimately, we know a lot of ways that I think can be helpful for organizations that have a lot on their plate. And so, appreciate the interest, appreciate you having me on. It was really a pleasure talking today.
And you said there was something else happening that you wanted to promote or talk about
Oh
too,
yeah,
right?
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. We
Yeah.
covered a lot, and of course, not the
Yeah, I
one
know.
thing I kind of talked about beforehand. We are currently we do an initiative each year called Celebrating America's Care Force, and the idea is that we ask the general public to share stories about really positive experiences that they've had with care workers across the continuum. Even hospitals, home care, but long-term care is kind of our bread and butter. And so if you know somebody who works in this field, in the industry, and they can be clinical and non-clinical, any job role or function, if they work in the buildings and you've got a great story about them, we'd love to hear about it. You go to our website and there'll be a link to the Celebrating America's Care Force initiatives. And we tie that into some national awards that we do for care workers, um, honoring people who are going above and beyond each day, but some really exceptional stories that I think help us to, you know, reframe the narrative a little bit about what this industry can accomplish at its best. And we also give away $2,500 to the recipients. So it'll be a nice little gift here. We won't choose them till after the holidays, but sometime in February, we'll be making those selections. So if you've got a moment, cecafoundation.org, the Celebrating America's Care Force Initiative. We'd love to hear those stories. Again, we love reading them, and who knows, one of your team members might be a winner.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes so everybody can get access to that before you guys wrap that up. So, um, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to extend a huge thank you to Nate Hamme for sharing his clear, grounded perspective on what's driving retention in long-term care, from the emotional realities of caregiving to the role of leadership and culture in keeping people connected to their work. Nate, your work insights offer a practical roadmap for operators who want to keep their best people and strengthen their teams. So, if you want to connect with Nate or learn more about CECA Foundation, we've included all of those links in the show notes. So, make sure to check that out. As always, we hope you found this episode insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore the evolving world of senior care, covering everything from innovative care models and leadership strategies to family support, technology, and the future of aging. And remember that From Lease to Leases isn't just an audio experience, we're also a video podcast. So if you want to see the full video episodes like the one here with Nate, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify channels. I'm Jerry Vinci, founder of CCR Growth. Thank you for joining us on From Leads to Leases. And please like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it useful. Until next time, lead with strategy and with heart. Chat with you again soon. Thanks, Nate.
You're here. Thank you, brother.
Thanks for listening to From Leads to Leases. Are you ready to fill your rooms faster and increase occupancy? Visit ccrgrowth.com to learn about our Senior Growth Innovation Suite, a proven system to generate highly qualified, tour-ready leads, accelerate sales, and reduce acquisition costs. Let's connect and turn your challenges into opportunities. See you next time.